fucking button. Like, dude, I love how nothing works in this day and age because everything is just made off like a comment farm or whatever, where it's like, oh yeah, this is completely free, and then you download it and open it.
Last year I made $1.7 million
by
doing the exact opposite
or like
of what
just
the business gurus told me to.
fucking thing.
And God
they
of
say
writing.
it's like it doesn't actually work. They just paid a lot of money to have people say it worked instead of paying a lot of money to have the thing actually work. They're just like, oh, I'm just gonna pay a shitload of money
because the city
to have it
was the major cult
work.
center of the Egyptian god Thoth. It was a city built by Thoth to worship the most ancient eight. And who is the Greek equivalent of Thoth? Hermes. So isn't Hermopolis quite fitting? It is.
Oh, nice. It actually came up. This is the one I was talking about.
They call him the Hidden One, the one who is everywhere but cannot be seen, the Lord of Truth, the Father of gods, the creator of animals and mankind,
but it was like
the Lord of things that
he
are,
made himself
the creator
a
of
god,
the staff
and they
of
called
life,
him legit
the amalgamation of two
limitless
powerful
god.
deities.
It's hilarious.
Amun-Ra
and he's
was
bipolar.
formed by the fusion of two ancient deities, Amun and Ra. Amun was the primordial god of the infinite air, a member of the powerful Ogdode of Hermopolis, who sat at the very top of the
I'll actually
pantheon,
do it right after
while
this,
Ra
but it
was the bright
sounded
shining
just
god
like,
of the sun, who blessed all that breathed and lived
now
with his
it's like some
life-giving
piece of
rays.
shit was doing some
Bright
shit
as the
with
sun
this
and proud as the eagle,
Anakit
Amun-Ra is the supreme god of Egyptian mythology and the protector of ancient Egypt.
Anon, and he
Known
was
by
trying to make a
different other
moon,
names,
and other
equal
people
to no
look like
other,
shit.
he was a self-created deity,
Oh yeah,
the
right
patron of
here.
pharaohs, the benefactor of mankind, the caretaker of the poor and troubled,
Oh,
the king
yeah,
of
that's what I was
men
gonna
and
say.
gods alike.
Uplifter of the
In the
poor.
beginning, there was nothing but eight most ancient deities, known as the Ogdode. The primeval waters, Nun and Nornet, the eternal time, Her and Hauhet, the gloomy darkness, Kuk and Kaukit, and the hidden air, Amun and Amunet. Amun became independent of the other primordial beings, rising to prominence and absolute power.
Yeah,
He rose above
see?
the Ogdode and could no longer remain a part of them. He
Oh,
had
yeah.
become whole, and that which is whole cannot remain apart. Thus, there needed to be a replacement in order to maintain the balance of the eightfold. Have you
Yeah,
ever heard of
see?
the saying that the
Total
number 4
power,
represents
and then they,
balance?
showed up to be like,
And
fuck
so,
that, this
there
is
came
fucked
another
up.
primordial force. There came Void, a void known as Nia, his female form called Neot. They say the
Neo.
infinite air of Amun gathered and condensed into a cosmic egg, incubating for many years. And when this cosmic egg hatched, out came Amun, more powerful than ever, a creator god in his own right. The Ogdode bowed before him, hailing him with realm-shaking howls, for he had the power to create and destroy, the power over life, death and resurrection. Amun went forth to shape the universe as he pleased. From the primeval waters of Nun, he called forth the shining sun, and called him Ra. Amun fused with the sun, and became Amun-Ra, combining the invisible force of the air with the visible majesty of the life-giving sun. He became an all-encompassing deity, a god without limits. He would also come to fuse with many of his godly descendants, becoming the omnipresent, omnipotent and omniscient one, seconding no other, past, present, and future. When Amun-Ra had shaped the universe, he saw that all was perfect, and the sight of such wonders made him cry. His tears fell to the earth and became humans, mortal beings he was proud of, but not for long. For as time passed, the humans became wicked and selfish, and Amun-Ra grew angry with them for their atrocious acts.
Yeah.
When he could no longer tolerate their wickedness, he summoned one of his daughters, a ferocious lioness called Sekhmet, and sent this wild lioness into the world to make humanity suffer. After Sekhmet had caused massive destruction and bloodshed, Amun-Ra decided to save the remaining humans, so they could bring forth a new generation of offspring, a better generation. But even at his command, Sekhmet would not stop killing. She had gone out of control. She had become obsessed with bloodshed. Amun-Ra turned a river into red wine, in a trick to calm this beast. And Sekhmet, thinking the red river was blood, drank so much of it, that she became so drunk, and fell asleep from intoxication. Amun-Ra then absorbed her back into his divine eye, ready to unleash her again, when the need arises.
Like this stupid Bible. Alright, this is a good segue. Back, library. Actually, I think it's in this one. Oh, great. Yeah, this side of the building has no service.
Egypt, 1300 BCE.
Yeah,
Laborers
this is when
toil under the hot
everything got
desert
all
sun,
fucked up, and
dismantling
they
a
literally
once-grand
still
temple.
do
The stone slabs are
solar
torn away
phallic
without
worship
regard for their
now.
ornate
Pretty
carvings,
sure I did it
destined
in
for
one
an
of the other
inglorious
ones.
fate as
But
construction
yeah,
fill.
so it got all
Nearby,
fucked up
men
when
break
you
open
took,
a pharaoh's burial chamber. And these men are no mere grave robbers,
gods,
but rather
fucking
priests and viziers.
Egypt.
Their mission? To scratch out all mentions of a certain name.
Yeah.
Akhenaten, once pharaoh of all Egypt and the voice of a god. But what crime, what blasphemy had he committed that would make his own subjects try to erase him from history?
Basically, make women and men not equal for the rest of history.
As a boy,
Yeah,
his
it's
name
pretty
was
bad.
Amenhotep IV, son of the 9th
And
pharaoh
there's
of Egypt's
still, like,
18th dynasty. He was
a
the
lot of
second son
fucking
and
kids
never
in his
expected to
name.
rule. Only after his brother died suddenly
That's
did
why,
he
like, the
become heir.
Illuminati and,
Amenhotep's
like,
father was an effective and
other
popular pharaoh
places
whose diplomatic
let
prowess
women
had led
in, but,
Egypt
like,
into
they're
an era
still
of
never
prosperity
equal
and
'cause
international
they're like,
influence.
"Oh,
However, when
well, we
Amenhotep himself
changed
came to
it
the throne,
where
he wasn't
Adam
overly
came
interested in
first,
the duties of
and they
leadership,
both came
preferring
at
to
the
devote
exact
his
same
time to
time.
worshipping a
They're
new
both
god
one
called
side of
Aten.
the yin-yang, but
that was
no,
a problem.
no,
You see,
we're making
most
it
of
different
Egypt saw Amen,
because
the
we
patron
suck.
god of Thebes, as their central deity. Not to mention it was the rulers of Thebes who had expelled the foreign kings that had governed Egypt for centuries. It was the rulers of Thebes who had founded the dynasty to which Amenhotep belonged. And it was the rulers of Thebes who had established what we now call Egypt's new kingdom. And they did all of that under the patronage and banner of the god Amen, savior of Egypt. Aten, on the other hand, initially started as an aspect of Ra, the sun god. Rather than a physical form like most Egyptian gods, Aten took the aspect of a solar disk. And while his cult was worship, he did not hold the same reverence as Amen did. But
I don't even
for whatever
know
reason,
if there's a
Amenhotep
picture
gave
in
his
this one,
devotion to Aten
but, like,
above
the
all
people
others.
that
And this
celebrate
young
this
pharaoh took no time in displaying that
fucking
devotion.
are
In his
not
early reign,
good
he
people,
preoccupied himself with
and
raising temples to
they
Aten, first at
make
Thebes, then at
things
Karnak.
like
Even though those
the
sites had previously been
Washington
dedicated to
Monument and whatever that
Amen. Okay, a
Washington
little presumptuous,
Monument is
sure.
in
But,
Boston.
I mean,
And
not a
there's even a
big deal,
Washington
right? I mean, the man's
Monument
pharaoh
in,
after all. But then, in the 5th
in
year of his
Egypt.
reign,
But it
things
was
started
like
to change.
in Egypt,
Amenhotep
Washington
officially changed his
Monument in
name to
Egypt was like
Akhenaten,
the
and a month
evil
later
people.
proclaimed his intention
It's
to
like,
build
oh,
a new
yeah,
capital
yeah,
city
the
named
Washington
Amarna,
Monument,
dedicated
George
to Aten.
Washington
And 4 years
is,
of furious construction later,
solar
Akhenaten
phallic
moved his family
worshipping.
and court into his
Or
still
they
incomplete
love
city.
to do this too.
This move wasn't
The
just
good
motivated
people
by
trying to wake
religious
you up.
zeal, however.
They trying
Egypt
to
was a large
clean the
country
fuck up
with
shit
multiple
on
power
him.
centers.
So he
Thebes
might
in the
have
south
been
was the seat of
okay,
religious
but I'm
power,
guessing he's
and
probably
Memphis in the
fucked
north,
up.
the
But it's
cultural
like,
center.
oh, yeah.
Akhenaten wanted to
Yeah,
consolidate all of that creative and religious
founder of our
power into his new
country
city. Not to mention,
just
there was another
loves
pressing
solar
justification for the
phallic
move.
worship,
In the
the
stela,
worship of
marking the
fucking
boundaries of Amarna,
Lucifer
there is
and
mention
raping
of
kids,
something
when,
that
like,
led
they literally have
Akhenaten to
no
fear
idea
organized opposition
that
to his rule.
It's not a
See,
child
Atenism had really
sacrifice.
caught on
Sacrifice
in the
means
society at large,
personal
and the priesthood of
sacrifice,
Amen
like
had not
working
taken
on
kindly
yourself
to the
and
encroachment of
lowering
Akhenaten's
yourself
monuments to
for
Aten.
God and
And fear of
becoming
these
a
groups
vessel,
spurred his
not
desire
just
to
being
have
like,
Aten's
oh, yeah,
utopia under
yeah,
his complete
I
control.
know the
Secure
word
in his new
sacrifice
capital,
means killing
Akhenaten
someone,
became
right?
increasingly despised.
Like, yeah,
While
you're
initially
so
he was
smart.
lenient towards
You're
other
so
gods,
smart. There's
eventually
only
he went
one
so far as to
definition
declare
to
Aten was
fucking
not just the supreme god,
sacrifice, just
but
like there's
the
only
only
one
god.
definition,
He ordered
or
all
there's
mentions of
only one
Amen to be
God.
scratched
Like, that
out,
makes
and
sense.
references to gods plural changed to God singular.
Yep.
Even mentions of his original name,
And
Amenhotep,
everything got
were all
fucked
struck
up,
out.
and, like,
And
the
eventually,
real start of
Akhenaten
the
forbade the
true
worship of
Illuminati,
Amen
or whatever they
entirely,
wanna call it,
closed all
since
of the
it's-
gods' temples,
it's not
and
even just
diverted their
them, it's
coffers
just
to
the
building
top
his grand
level
capital. During
of
his
every
reign,
religion,
soldiers
top
patrolled the
level
streets. Citizens took to
capitalism,
scratching out the names of rival
Catholic
deities on their possessions. And in
shit,
his capital, Akhenaten's obsession
top
and hubris
level of
only grew.
Jewish
He composed a
faith,
grand
top
hymn to his
level of
patron, positioning
everything
Aten as the sole deity and
is
himself as the
just
only intermediary who could speak to
solar
the god.
phallic
He wanted the world to know
worship.
that Akhenaten alone could channel Aten's divine will. Along with this religious oppression came a bizarre new style
Yeah,
of art.
Aten,
Traditionally,
Aten,
the pharaoh
that's
had always
his
been
name.
shown
Sounds
in a
like
compact,
Adam, but
rigid
it's really
style.
fucking-
But statues of Akhenaten, however, show highly exaggerated
Yeah,
features.
see, that's
His head
like
and neck
the
are elongated,
evil-
with prominent chin and
evil
sloping nose and forehead.
aliens.
His body is depicted with wider hips, a more pronounced chest, and a noticeable paunch. Alongside
yeah,
these personal
yeah.
reliefs were also domestic scenes with his wife, Queen Nefertiti, and their 6 daughters.
I think
These
he was-
depict the pharaoh
oh,
and his
yeah,
family
yeah.
in quaint
They're
scenes, often
literally
showing motion and
kissing
activity,
babies,
whereas
like,
Egyptian art up to
sucking
that
their
point had mostly
adrenochrome in
consisted
this
of
fucking
motionless
picture.
characters in strict poses. And of course, the sun disk of Aten
Yeah,
was also
exactly.
prominently featured in this new style.
And
Now,
that
the
is
reasons for this
literally
radical
on
artistic
every
change remain
single
unknown, but this
flag
shift seems to have been
ever. Here, I bet I can
commissioned by
even show it
Akhenaten
on this.
himself. Perhaps this
Alright.
style reflected his attempts to wrest political control from the priesthood,
Where-
or portray his view of himself as different from other people.
Okay,
Maybe he wanted to show
so-
the human body as imperfect in comparison to the glory of
Watch
Aten,
this.
or perhaps the relatable scenes of his family were meant to rally public support.
Text.
But whatever the reason, it didn't matter much, much, because over
here,
time, Akhenaten's
flags.
obsession with religious policies damaged the country.
There we go.
He neglected matters of
So,
state, losing some foreign
you
territory,
see,
all while his building
every
programs
time
drained the economy.
there's a
Wait, you mean to
sun
tell
and
me
a
constructing a
moon,
new capital wasn't cheap?
crossed with stars
In
like the
addition,
British
his plans for
flag,
consolidating religious, political, and cultural power backfired. Closing the temples to Amun
Star
cut off the steady stream of
Stripes,
revenue those
right
temples
there.
generated for the state, and centralizing
Right
power
there.
gave his courtiers vast control over Egypt's wealth, leading to
there,
unprecedented
right
levels
there.
of corruption in his court.
Right there,
And when it was all
right
said and
there,
done,
right there, right
Akhenaten
there, right
died
there,
only
right
17
there, right
years
there, right
after coming
there.
to the throne, ruling for less than half of the time
Right
of his
there, right
prosperous
there,
father.
right there,
With Akhenaten's
right
death,
there.
the installation of
Right
Atonism
there.
instantly
Oh, yeah, anything
collapsed.
with the temple
You see,
across
even though
too.
people obeyed his
There's the
decrees,
evil
mainly
side.
out of fear,
Evil, evil,
nobody
evil,
really gave
evil,
up the old
evil.
gods. Ancient
Evil,
Egypt was a
evil,
civilization
evil, evil.
characterized by stasis and reluctant change. And while a string of short-lived successors followed, with
Evil,
Akhenaten gone,
evil.
none of them were really keen to
Evil,
prop up his
evil.
revolution. So in the end, Atonism was entombed along with the dead pharaoh.
Evil, 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 evil.
Danger is coming.
Oh my god, I'm not even gonna do all these. Evil.
Introducing Hershey's
Evil.
Organic.
Evil. But yeah, like literally every single flag
And for the
that
last
there
element-
has been that fucking bullshit. And it's like, that's fucking such a close-minded way of looking
A
at things.
future Nikola Tesla.
This is the only kid you can
And
watch
tell us
because,
your name and
dude,
what you
I
do for a
hate-
living.
Hi, I'm
I'm guessing the
Maxwell
rotate
Lonnie,
button doesn't fucking work.
And
Yep, cool,
I am
cool.
a physicist, inventor, entrepreneur,
Bullshit.
and, well, I guess change maker. I'm 13, and I feel like I can change the world, and I've already
Apparently,
started a
it doesn't.
positive impact on it.
What have you done? How have you changed the world so far?
So aside from inventing a whole bunch of different stuff that probably won't matter now, but my most recent thing, which has gotten me a little bit of attention online, is my energy device, where I extract electromagnetic energy from everything around us and convert
Yeah,
it into
just like
electrical
Tesla,
energy.
it's
In other
not
words,
even that
a
hard.
stream
They
of
just don't
unlimited
want
energy.
free power for everyone. They want to keep their feet
So,
pressing
do you
down
think
on
you
us.
can solve our
and-
energy crisis here on planet Earth?
I believe I will, and I believe I already have solved the main problem. Now it's just a matter of, getting this out there.
Yeah, exactly.
And what do
he
you
even
need
says
to
it.
be able to get
he
this
even
out there?
talks
You just
about
need
like he
somebody
might
to
be
watch
getting,
this
he might
video
get
and say,
murdered for
"Here's
this information.
some
It's
money,"
like, yeah.
or what do you need?
Why do you think he thinks
Well,
that poor
all I can
13-year-old
think
kid
of
might get
really is
murdered
support,
for having good ideas?
Throughout history, people like me have been
Boom.
prosecuted and killed, murdered, and a lot of other very horrible
Yeah,
things.
he's like, just share my
And
message so I
if
don't
have
get
support
murdered
from
for having
a lot
good
of
ideas.
people, I don't
Awesome
think
world we
that,
live in. Awesome.
That will happen in our modern day and age. We're a little bit too
Hopefully
civilized
not,
for
dude.
that.
If anyone kills
So
this
all I'm
kid,
saying
dude,
is that
I
if
am
you
like
think the world
just
should be a
gonna
better place too,
nuke
then,
this
you know,
whole planet.
just
I don't even
support.
know how to, but
Okay,
I'll find a
so
way.
we
Like
started off by talking about my book, E equals MC squared, and the new definition of God, and you told me that you had already come to the same conclusion 3 years ago, and that my book was a dumbed-down version of your theory, which I think it's
funny.
clearly the case. What is God?
So, a lot of. We're in the United
Okay.
Nations.
Yeah, and people walking around down in the basement here. Go ahead. What
yeah,
is
best
what is
ideas in the
Okay,
world,
so,
and he's down in a
a lot
basement
of people
somewhere.
think God is, quite in the biblical sense, a guy sitting up on a cloud who controls the universe, frankly, and has created all life. But my definition of God is not like that. I don't believe God is person
Yeah,
or
energy.
entity. God is just another form of energy. Well, actually, is energy.
Yeah, and it's like
Himself,
he's like a
well, not
crazy
even
ass
himself,
physicist,
itself.
and I'm a dude
For
in
the
a
fact
car. I have the
that,
same conclusions
you
as
look at
well.
the Bible and other really, awesome but extremely vague and unreliable sources in religion
Unreliable.
that hold these sources that we find and facts that we find, or so-called facts that we find, and really a lot of people think it's just about faith. But if you relate the Bible to quantum physics and apply most of the laws actually in not less of a figurative sense, but more of a literal sense, and replace it with things like the universe, you'll eventually find out that it explains in-depth quantum physics and astrophysics, experiments and theories. Well, maybe not theories, because maybe now they're proven. Who knows? Maybe the Bible isn't a story of something that happened on Earth, but maybe a story of how our universe began. For the fact that, honestly, I don't really buy into
I never
the
found
literal
that.
biblical sense. Like, God is literally a guy who looks like us, who sits up in an alternate realm that's in our clouds and, watches over all of us, but I guess you could say that he's an energy form that created all, and is everywhere and nowhere at the same time. God, or energy, lives within us, through us, and
is us.
And is us, frankly.
So you said what? That God is the energy that is in us, created us, and is us. Is that your definition?
Yep.
I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Also a definition
God
for
is
the
energy.
all.
That's my thing. And I mean, like, you look
Or
at
the law of
dimensional
one.
theory, and eventually we have, the singularity at the beginning of the universe that is energy, and then, eventually that begins to slow down in vibration due to entropy or some other law of that sort. And then, first you get photonic light, and then that slows down, and then we get matter, and then that slows down, and then who else knows what comes next? We have gravity, and then we have time. All coming in at one sense. And I mean, does that sound like origin story to you? It kind of does a little bit to me, but maybe that's just a coincidence. Maybe these philosophers.
So I was gonna say, like, real smart people just say
unreliable monks, we call them,
coincidence
that
and
lived
says
up in the
maybe
mountains
and
wrote this
interesting all the time.
weird
You never
book
say, like,
that
I
doesn't have any
100% know
factual
anything,
evidence
because you
behind
don't.
it. Maybe they were
say that's
physicists
a lot of
ahead their time,
coincidences.
and maybe they were just trying to tell people, who lived
Like,
a crazy long time ago, that there is an entire new quantum world out there, but education wasn't too
yeah,
good,
and I thought
so
that was
they had
like
to
very
simplify.
interesting about like the Ankh, the symbol of knowledge for man, alright, I'm done work, so get the fuck out of here. Because it's like, yeah, even in this day and age, it's like, I can't
So you're
talk
saying
about
people
it.
who
Like, if I
believe
talk
in the
about all
Bible
this
as written,
God
as
and
the
science
Bible
shit
conventionally,
around people, they'll
are
be like, no,
kind of
you-
like 5-year-olds.
You can't do that. Yeah, they are like 5-year-olds currently.
Well,
Yep.
500 years ago? No, sorry, 1,000 years ago, probably. But more of like, I'm saying, maybe in the sense of not really, I guess, honestly, don't want to insult anybody.
That they're dumb as shit and they fucking don't know anything. And that's not my phone. This video glitches right here, but
Patience to real life. So,
but yeah, just like,
saying
oh yeah,
that
sacrificing,
it's a coincidence.
sacrificing.
It's not fact. I'm not saying
Should
anything's
not-
anything.
Yeah.
I have a very religious grandmother, so
Yeah,
I
it's
have to
like
tell
you
you,
say the shit
I
around people
let
they
you
can't
kind
handle,
of struggle
handle
with
it.
this because I realized the question was a little bit perhaps impolite to some people. And the way you handled that was a way that my political and business clients, if they did it as well as you, I'd be incredibly proud.
But
So
yeah, all
the
these
bottom
crazy
line
good
is
ideas, and
that
he's in
we keep
some
evolving,
dumbass
right? And the
basement
Bible was written in
because he
different
has
ways
to
to
hide the
interpret it.
information.
Now, you
because
said something
any
about
good
the Bible
information's,
and using the
hidden.
letters
It's just
going
like, oh,
backwards in the Fibonacci
it's not
theory.
actually
Can you
good. We
explain
just
that?
paid a
Because
lot of
that's
money
amazing.
For people to
in
say
certain
it's
parts
good
of the
instead of just
Bible, you
making
can
it
get
good.
literally, if you convert the letters to numbers,
Speak a little louder if you
the
can.
Fibonacci sequence, if you invert, of course.
Oh, yeah.
But in certain important parts of the book, you'll take certain parts out and you'll get numbers, which seem random, but they're actually frequencies of resonance that line up with what's called the Fibonacci spiral. And the Fibonacci spiral is kind of weird for the
Yeah,
fact that it's
the
called
Nautilus,
literally
the
God's
fern,
thumbprint, which is a little bit
any
weird,
spiral you
considering
just
that
draw by
we
a
have
sketch
spiral
all
galaxies,
has
spirals in our thumbs,
yeah I
spirals
even
in our
said
ears.
yeah that's how you
Literally,
time travel because
almost
the
every
galaxy like
organism on
we're moving
the
so infinitely
planet
fast
or
that we can't even
object
see
we
it,
found
so
has
like
some
we're
sort of
each just like a
reminiscence
picture
of
through time and
Fibonacci
it's
in it.
being
I
like
don't know,
it's like a
called
spiral of
God's
film,
trademark
but if you
or
go up
God's
to the
thumbprint,
center of the
but,
spiral, that's my theory on how you time
I don't
travel.
know. It's
So,
just a coincidence, I guess.
so if you're the reincarnation of anyone, who do you think it would be, or who would you
And
like
they're
it
literally
to be?
just saying to a reincarnation.
I honestly think that I'm Max Lawson, and that's who I am.
Yeah,
So
because
I'm
if he
gonna
says
say
Tesla, they're gonna
Max
kill him.
Lawson. But I'm very proud of and quite a big fan of Nikola Tesla.
Yeah, he's smarter than
I'd
me.
like to be the
Just being like,
reincarnation
no,
of him,
I'm not
but
a
honestly,
reincarnation
I
of
think I'm just a
anyone. Yeah.
student of his many teachings.
But yeah, it's like
That's amazing. What's the
anyone can be a
favorite thing that he
reincarnation.
has
I'm pretty sure
invented
it's
or
just like whose
theorized about for
energy
you?
you channel and
Honestly,
honoring the dead
I
properly.
really
Because
like his work
I mean,
with,
if I went around like butt
electrostatic
fucking kids
pulses,
and saying I was
like
Chester
he,
Bennington, I don't think
harnessed,
anything would happen. But if I'm
Tesla
trying to
coil
like
powers and use it to wirelessly transfer
bring
energy
justice to his
through
life,
people,
then
around people, and how he
I
could
get the
like
energy,
light
I
himself
guess.
on fire,
But
but
I don't
not be
fucking know.
hurt
That's the
by
whole
it.
point. Good
That was
scientists
pretty crazy.
don't know. They just have
So
theories.
I really like that.
hybrid.
That's very cool. So just a couple more questions. You're extraordinarily inspiring. And I agree with you on your definition of God and wrote a children's book that basically says that. But you then, before when we were talking about infinity in different universes.
Oh yeah, infinity.
So we've kind of identified God. God is energy,
the next
right?
one after.
All the energy in the universe, that's God. It's not a guy in the sky, it's energy.
Energy isn't something that you just have. Energy is all and can't be. Not all the energy in the universe, it's energy. Energy happens to consume the entire universe and every other parallel dimension or universe that can ever exist in our dimensional reality, but...
Are there other universes? Are there other dimensional realities?
Dimensional realities, I'm not sure if we can prove that yet, but we do know that there are other dimensions.
Okay, how do you know that?
Well, there's an infinite number of numbers, which means there's an infinite number of frequencies that we can calculate. And if there's an infinite number of frequencies that we can calculate, that means there's an infinite number of frequencies that mass can take. And if mass can take an infinite number of frequencies, there must be an infinite number of dimensions. Or if you're one of those string theory guys, there's 10. Or if you're in M theory, you say it's 11 dimensions. But as of right now, I'm beginning to question string theory and M theory for the fact that I believe that there are more.
Yeah, I
mean,
think
mathematical
it's string theory and chaos theory operating
but then again,
in harmony.
Imagine we're looking at this from a fourth dimensional perspective. We can always go up one dimension from there. We can't say that there's a limitation. In other words, we know that there's
limitless.
Us, but we've
the
never
limit doesn't
gone into
exist.
dimensions even. And to even contemplate the fact that if we were at the top of the dimensional scale, there'll have to be something above us. In other words, if you're at the top of a dimensional scale, we have to have some sort of limitations, right? Everything does. And if that has limitations, then it opens up an entire new set of dimensions. And then, you know, what happens when they're at the top, and then they're at the top, and continuing on and on forever, I guess.
Are there multiple universes, or is this the only universe?
Yeah.
Yes, every time an electron moves an atom
Yeah,
meter, or
every time,
less
like,
than
yeah.
a millionth, 100
So every
millionth,
time they bang
infinite
that particle
googolplex of
collider,
an
it
atometer
fucking
around,
fucks our universe to the next dimension, I guess.
a nucleus, or maybe just
And they like
floating
think
around
they
the
think it's
universe.
fine.
Anytime
They think it's
anything
fine
moves any
probably,
bit,
and think like
you're shot
nothing's
into an
happening. When
infinite
really
number
it's
of
like
parallel
you don't notice the
universes in which can
changes. You don't notice the
happen.
changes,
And so
and I feel like they're happening more and more frequently
right
now.
from the original
Like even
universe,
stuff that was like
constantly shifting closer
different
and
like
farther
a
away from
day
it.
ago was
So,
different
yes.
now.
Wow. Wow. So Brian Greene, the famous physicist who wrote Annihilation.
But I'm very proud of, and
Oh, dude, fuck
quite a big
these
fan of
fucking
Nikola
things.
Tesla.
Like I said, just like
I'd
nothing
like to be the
fucking
reincarnation.
works good these
But
days.
that means
Nothing
that
fucking
there's an
works
infinite
good.
number of parallel
Or actually, here, I'll do this one.
400
and then
years
I'll
ago,
set this one
Galileo
shorter, and then
started
I'll
piecing
do
together the basic
the other one on,
principles
like,
of
the
reality,
next episode
what
or
we now
whatever.
call modern science. But the questions he was trying to
This one's
answer
cool
were
because
as
it's
old
like
as
actually
humanity
religion
itself.
in it, because it's like the Trinity.
What are we made of?
And one of them's called the Tao.
What are the
which
fundamental
is like,
building
how
blocks
would
of
Lao
the universe
Tzu
from
in
which
ancient
you,
China
me,
know
the
what a
stars,
Tao
and everything
particle
else is
was?
constructed?
Well, it's not like he knew that was
In the
how it was
centuries
called,
since
but maybe he
Galileo,
did.
thousands of theories and experiments have peered into smaller and smaller distances, converging on a single picture of the structure of matter. This somewhat daunting-looking formula is where we end up. It gives the correct answer to hundreds of thousands of experiments, in some cases with an accuracy that is unprecedented in science.
Yeah, but they called a
It
standard
is,
theory.
by
and
any
then,
measure,
like,
the most successful scientific theory of all
Einstein's
time.
Relatively
And
is like
yet,
a very,
for
very
something so
small,
extraordinary, we give it a rubbish
part
name.
of this, yeah.
We call it the Standard Model. I'm David Tong, a theoretical physicist at the University of Cambridge. And in this video, we're going to build the Standard Model piece by piece. I hope that
I'm
by
really
the end
sorry
you'll
if
have
you
some
can't
intuition for how the
understand
different
this
parts
shit,
fit
'cause
together
you're
to
now going to
create
be
the fundamental
understanding
building
this
blocks
on fast
of our
forward
universe.
as well.
This is the Standard Model. It describes how everything in the universe is made of 12 different types of matter particles, interacting with 3 forces, all bound together by a rather special particle called the Higgs boson.
It makes a pyramid.
Before we get going,
I think.
some caveats. First, I said 3 forces, while there are actually 4 fundamental forces at play in the universe. This means there's something missing from this picture, and that something would be gravity. The most obvious
I feel
force
like
at play
that
in the world
is
around
wrong
us, and yet,
its
in many
time.
senses, the one that we understand least. We do have a theory
Or
of gravity,
gravity
a
in
very
time
successful
is,
theory.
like,
It was given to us by Albert
different
Einstein, and
than
it goes by
what
the name
they
of general
say.
relativity. But there are 2 good reasons why it's not included in the Standard Model. The first is that, at the microscopic level, the force of gravity is so weak that it barely has any effect on a single subatomic particle. The second is that we don't really know how to incorporate general relativity, which is a classical theory, into the quantum world. We have no idea how to peer into a black hole where quantum gravity effects are clearly at work. A second caveat is that the Standard Model is written in a language known as quantum field theory. This tells us that matter, at the fundamental level, is not really made up of particles. Instead, it's made up of fields, fluid-like objects which are spread throughout all of space. These fields are engaged in an intricate, harmonious dance to a music that we call the laws of physics. The interactions between the fields produce the physical world in the form of particles. To understand the Standard Model, it's more convenient to use the language of particles.
In the morning again, like.
As we build up the Standard Model, we're going to meet lots of particles with an array of names that can very quickly become bewildering. But there's one classification of particles that is, by far, the most important. Every particle is either a fermion, which is a matter particle, or a boson, which is a force particle.
This is the crazy
The distinction between fermions and bosons lies in the quantum world.
Because it's like
fermions must obey something that we call the Pauli
oppressors,
exclusion
the people,
Roughly
the sheep
speaking,
in the
this means
box
we can't put
are
two
the
fermions on top of each other in
fermions. See, there's
space.
segregation.
As such,
They
are the building blocks of matter.
See, they don't combine. These are like the segregation people, like the racists that, like, you know, think they can just live in a box and, you know, just not, you know, integrate with the lower levels of society. And then the other people are like the non-racists, like lower levels that actually can
Bosons, on the other
combine.
hand, can pile on top of each other as much as they want, because they're not obliged to obey the Pauli exclusion principle. Bosons are the particles that mediate various forces,
Racist
and we'll
and
talk
not
about them much more
racist,
later.
that-
But for now, let's start by looking at the fermions. Everything we're made of can be reduced to just three matter particles. This is the electron and two species of quarks that we call the up quark and the down quark. The familiar proton and neutron each contain 3 quarks. The proton has 2 up quarks and a down, while the neutron has 2 down quarks and an up. Put protons and neutrons together, and you have a nucleus. Add electrons into the mix, and you have an atom. Put a bunch of atoms together, and that's what we're made of. All the beauty and complexity that we see in the world around us can be traced to the same collection of 3 particles, rearranged over and over in different combinations.
Oh yeah, this is fucking quality.
Next comes the fourth type of matter particle.
Awesome.
It's called the neutrino, and it's not like the others. Neutrinos are extremely light and barely interact with anything else. For example, in the time it took me to say that, something like 100 trillion neutrinos passed through your body. Most of them came from the sun, but millions of them have been streaming uninterrupted through the universe since the first few seconds after the Big Bang.
Fucking quit on this fucking bullshit.
So there we have it. 4 matter particles. 3 that make up you, me, and everyone we know, and 1 very peculiar cosmic ghost flowing through us all. But here's where things start to get weird, because nature didn't stop there. For reasons that we do not understand, she took this collection of 4 particles and made 2 further copies. This means that there are actually 3 different kinds of electron particles. In addition to the original electron that we know and love, there are particles called the muon and the tau. The muon and the tau behave exactly like an electron, with one important exception. They're heavier. The muon is about 200 times heavier than the electron, the tau almost 3,500 times heavier. The same generational pattern then repeats for the quarks. There are 2 heavier versions of the down quark that we call the strange and bottom quarks, and 2 heavier versions of the up quark called charm and top. And then there are also 2 more neutrinos. We become a little bit unimaginative in our naming and call the full collection the electron neutrino, the muon neutrino, and the tau neutrino. Now, we don't see the second and third generation of particles in everyday life. We can create these heavier particles, but they're unstable, which means that they quickly decay to the first generation of particles that we're made of. Nonetheless, we know they exist. We can detect them in particle accelerators, and in many cases we can take photographs of the tracks they leave behind. This is the collection of particles that makes up our world. 3 sets of 4. Some of this we understand very well. In particular, we understand why particles have to come in a set of 4. There's a mathematical consistency condition in the Standard Model that tells us you can't have one particle without the other 3. In contrast, we don't understand at all why there are 3 generations rather than any other number. That remains a complete mystery. There is, however, a surprising aspect of mathematical unity here. All particles are described by exactly the same equation. This equation was written down in the 1920s by the physicist Paul Dirac, originally to describe the electron. But as we discovered more and more particles, we realized the Dirac equation, or variants of it, also describes them. So that's the stuff we're made of. But still we're missing something crucial.
Get it? You are the universe, you are God.
Without the forces, the universe would be boring. All the particles would wander around the cosmos like lost souls, never interacting, never doing anything interesting.
Good would be meaningless.
There are 3 fundamental forces in the Standard Model: electromagnetism, the strong force, and the weak force.
And it's funny, the weak
Each of these forces comes with an associated
like
particle. These particles are what we call bosons, the other half of our particle family. Bosons are force-carrying particles. In one way of viewing things, you can think of the fermions as constantly swapping bosons between them, affecting their motion and giving rise to what we call a force. Let's begin with the most familiar of these forces. Electromagnetism is responsible for the chemical properties of the elements, and we've harnessed it to create much of modern technology. It acts on anything that carries electric charge. That means that it acts on the electron-type particles and the quarks, but not on the neutrinos, because neutrinos are electrically neutral. An electron sitting still in space will give rise to an electric field which spreads radially outwards and attracts or repels all other electrically charged particles in its neighbourhood. But if you look more closely at that electric field, you'll find that it's comprised of the particles of electromagnetism. These particles we call photons. Next is the strongest fundamental force in nature, aptly named the strong force. This force acts only on quarks and subsequently on particles like protons and neutrons that are made of quarks. It's the strong force that holds together the nuclei of atoms. It's also this force that is responsible for nuclear fission and gives the energy that is released in an atomic explosion. Just as the photon is associated to electromagnetism, there is a particle associated to the strong force. We call it the gluon, because it literally sticks quarks together. As an electron gives rise to an electric field, so a quark sitting in space will give rise to a gluon field. But now something different happens. Unlike electromagnetism, the field doesn't spread out radially. Instead, the quark produces a thin flux tube, a string-like object which can only end when it finds a different kind of quark. This is what makes the strong force strong.
Holy Trinity.
Because the quarks are joined by a flux tube, it takes more and more energy to pull them apart. This is why we never see quarks on their own. They're always bound together by the strong force inside bigger particles like protons and neutrons. The third and final force is the most intricate and subtle of them all.
Yeah.
This is the weak force.
Yeah, the most intricate.
Like the strong force, the weak force acts only on
and the
subatomic
weak
distance
force.
scales. But rather than binding particles together, the weak force is all about
and like
decay.
the strong force.
We just learned that the
like
strong force binds
string
quarks
theory,
together to form
and
protons
this
and
one would be
neutrons,
like chaos
creating the atomic
theory.
nucleus.
Like I said, working in
the weak
harmony.
force has the astonishing ability to allow quarks to switch their identity. A down quark can turn into an up quark, releasing an electron and a neutrino in the process. This means that a neutron can morph into a proton, in what we call radioactive beta decay. In this way, the weak force is responsible for the nuclear fusion reactions that power the sun and produce the energy required for life on Earth. Finally, the weak force is also the reason that heavier matter particles quickly decay into the 3 lighter and more stable fermions that make up matter as we know it. There are particles associated to the weak force, and we call these the W and Z bosons. The weak force is the only one of the 3 forces to act on all particles. In particular, it's the only force that neutrinos feel. Finally, it's time to meet the last piece of the jigsaw, the particle that in many ways ties the whole Standard Model together. This is the Higgs boson. To explain why the Higgs boson is so special, I should first tell you a striking fact. None of the fundamental particles in the world have a mass. This is where the Higgs boson comes in. Its role is to endow all fermions with a mass. I'd love to be able to give you a clear explanation for why this happens, but sadly, it's difficult to come up with good analogies for the Higgs field. Here's what I would say is a so-so analogy. You should view the Higgs field as something like a cosmic molasses, spread throughout the universe, trapping matter particles as they travel through space, and giving them what appears to us to be a mass.
So gravity
So
is
this
an illusion.
is the Standard Model. 12 matter particles interacting with 3 forces and a Higgs field.
Yeah, look,
It's a beautiful
pyramid.
picture, the pinnacle of 400 years of science. But it's clear that the Standard Model is not the last word in physics. Since the discovery of the Higgs boson, physicists like me feel that in many ways the Standard Model is too successful. It gives the right answer to every experiment that we do. Our current hope is that we'll eventually find an experiment that it gives the wrong answer to.
But yeah,
And
it's
there are
like
some
they
hints
don't-
that this is happening. Because
Probably don't even
only
use
then
that. Any good
we get
information,
clues
they're like,
about
nah, well,
what
we
lies
won't use
beyond.
that. We're gonna suppress the good information and
One
just
of the open
sacrifice
questions about the
kids
Standard
or
Model
some
is
fucking
whether the
weird
3
shit.
fundamental forces are actually different, or whether they are a manifestation of a single all-encompassing force. This is the dream of a grand unified theory. There are some theoretical signs that this may be the way things work out, but so far, no experimental confirmation.
Unified field
Of course,
theory.
we're also left with the obvious thing that's missing, and that's gravity. At the beginning of this video, I talked about the problem with quantum gravity. In recent years, we've discovered gravitational waves, which are ripples of space and time itself. And, if we look closely, there are good reasons to believe that these waves are made of quantum particles that we call gravitons, just like light waves are made of photons. There are other things missing too. The Standard Model doesn't include the invisible realm of dark matter and dark energy, which means that we're missing an explanation for a whopping 95% of the energy in the universe. Dark matter is almost certainly made up of additional particles that don't interact with electromagnetism. Perhaps these particles have their own forces and their own messenger bosons.
Matter is like
and there are still more questions about the Standard Model that we just don't know how to answer.
No.
Why is the muon 200 times heavier than the electron, while the top quark is 350,000 times heavier than the electron? Why is the neutrino 1,000,000 times lighter? We have no idea. And we have no way of predicting the masses of these particles
that's like the
other
same
than
thing
going
as
out and measuring
religion.
them in
It's like
experiments.
we have no idea.
But there
we
are
can only
clearly
test
patterns
our
within
own
the masses of the
theories,
particles, which strongly suggests
we'll never know. We can only test our own theories, and always once you have a theory, it's like it always gets proven wrong. Just like when I like to reference the Assassin 14, because I can probably even check it might shut the thing off. I'll just clip it together if it does. But oh yeah, say like, oh damn it, I pressed the wrong one. It's like this one was actually good, but like the other ones, watch, you still have to watch an ad. But the other ones, it's like, oh, completely free. And it's like, you go to sign in, it's like, oh, you want to upgrade a premium or like do a 3-day or 5-minute trial. One time my daughter had this slime game, and it was like $30 a month just to like play with pretend slime on a phone. And it's like, dude, that's great. That's great. Oh, sick. No, they're not here. All right, I'm gonna stop this for a second.